All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode. Now, you can see from where we left off last time that we were talking about some types. So in Swift, we talked about some types specifically: integer, double, float, character string, Boolean, and optional or nil. Now, we also have briefly mentioned in the past the idea of a class and a function, and we have used the print function. And that's what today's episode is going to be about, is going deep on functions specifically with a little highlight on what classes are and what they mean. And then we're also going to write some functions of our own. As we mentioned in previous episodes, if you already know how to program, you're not a beginner, go ahead and skip to episode 6, which will be the next episode. These first episodes are really focused on building the foundation and the fundamentals of programming for complete beginners. And this tutorial is going to be completely geared towards beginners. But if you already know a little bit about programming, go ahead and skip to the next episode. All right, let's get started. All right, we're going to go ahead and delete everything from the previous episode. Since these were kind of just like vocabulary words, things that you needed to be aware of, and concepts, they're not actually going to help us build our final app right now. So we can go ahead and delete this code so we have a nice clean slate. And this actually looks super similar to what our template started us with. So let's look at the top here. This is one of the keywords that we haven't really talked much about, and this is the word class. Now, class refers to a class of objects that can exist. It's a way of taking data, like maybe several numbers and strings, and grouping them together in a way that can represent something more meaningful, often something in the real world. So example could be, maybe we have a class that is a calculator class, and the calculator class knows what the user has typed in, and it knows how to do math on those numbers that were typed in by the user. Or, as is often cited in computer science, maybe you have an animal class, and maybe the animal class has a string that tells you the name of the animal, and maybe it has a string that tells you the phylum, kingdom, genus, species. You can model all kinds of things, anything from cars to stuff that's really conceptual and maybe even doesn't have a representation in real life. So in this case, we're going to be talking about this class that was provided to us, and this class that we've actually been using this entire time without really knowing much about it. And this class is called viewController. Now, there is another class that exists that is called a view, and view is just a way of drawing something on the screen. So when you launch an app and you're scrolling through your Facebook feed, or you're tapping buttons, or you're typing in some text, all of those things that you're interacting with, those are views. Now, we're not working on the view yet. You'll notice this class is not called view, it's called viewController. And the reason why it's called viewController is because the responsibility of it is going to be to control the view of our app. So it's going to be supplying all of the information and talking back and forth with the actual buttons and things that will be on screen for our calculator. Now, the second part of a class that can be a little hard to understand, so we're going to take it a little slow, is inheritance. And what that means is you can have a class, and then you can have a more specific version of a particular class. So we talked about animal before, and there are going to be traits that are different for different kinds of animals. So for example, you could have a class that represented dogs, because there are things that are specific about dogs that other animals don't have. And so that relationship would be that your dog class would inherit from the animal class. Now, in our case, we have what is called UI viewController, which is a class that is provided to us by Apple, and it makes it so that we can control things on an iPhone or an iPad screen. Now, when we subclass, or we make a more specific viewController, we are taking this generic UI viewController that Apple has provided to us that allows the control of any type of view, and we're making it specific. And so if we wanted to be really specific, we could even change the name here of our class to be calculator view controller, because that's actually exactly what this view controller is. This is a view controller that's going to control our calculator. Now, this template, it uses the word view controller all over the place in it. And so we're not actually going to change this right now. We're going to leave it named view controller just for simplicity's sake. But you can change the name of classes and you can make them more specific to what your actual use case is. But in this case, we're going to leave it as is. Now, the next thing that we're going to talk about here is a function. And you can see this function keyword, func. And we talked about print before. Print was a function that the functionality that function had was to take something you gave it and print it in the console below. And you can still see we have our -10, 10.5, and 10 printed out from our previous session. Now, in this case, we have viewDidLoad. And why it's called viewDidLoad is this is the function that UI view controller will call after its view has been loaded. So what that looks like to you is if you tap on an app, you wait a second, you wait for it to load, and then when the app actually comes on screen, that's when viewDidLoad would be called, because the view actually finally got loaded. And so we're not going to change this. You'll notice that we've been sticking all our code there, but we're going to leave it as is because this is actually a special function that UI view controller knows about, and it's really convenient for us to keep it around. So we're going to leave it as is. But let's take this lesson a little farther here. We're going to mimic the syntax here, and we're going to make our own function. And since this is a calculator, we're going to make ourselves an add function. So the first thing to do is to write func, which is the keyword that indicates to the compiler that this is a function. And you'll notice that Xcode turns it purple. It recognizes what you've typed. Then we'll name our function. Now in this case, we're going to name our function add. Now, just like print takes something in and it does something with it. And in our case, our add function is going to take two things in and it's going to add them together. So we're going to have what is called a parameter. Now, parameters are just a way of specifying the things that you can give to your function so that it can do its functionality on them. So in this case, it's going to add our two parameters. Our first parameter is going to be called first number. And then just like variables, we're going to add a colon and tell the compiler here that it is a double. And you can see that Xcode highlights it in blue because it knows what the double is. And we're going to do a comma to separate our parameters. And we're going to name our second one, which is second number. And we're going to do the same thing. Now, finally, we're going to supply what is called a return value. A return value is what your function gives back once it has done something with the things that you gave to it. So in this case, you're going to give two numbers to our add function, and it's going to give back one number. So we specify the return type by putting this little minus sign and then I guess that's a greater than sign, which makes this little arrow. You can see it looks like a little arrow passing it back out. And we're going to type that this is a double. So this add function takes first number, which is a double, second number, which is a double, and it returns or gives back another double. And so we can go ahead and we can write out return, which is a special keyword here. And we're just going to say, okay, well, first number plus second number, which is exactly what our add function was designed to do, is designed to take two doubles and add them together. Now, this is pretty trivial for our first function, but it's a good place to start. It helps us understand all of the elements of a function. In fact, just like with our other variables, you can option click on the name of the function, on the word add, and you can see that Xcode actually understands all the pieces. It highlights the word function, it highlights double, and it even tells you the types of things. So it knows exactly what you've typed. And this can be really comforting because you can know that, hey, I haven't even run my code yet, but Xcode is recognizing what I've typed. This is valid code. So now here's where the real power of functions come in. With our print function, you would have noticed that we called it 3 or 4 times over the course of the lesson, and we just kept reusing it. And it was awesome because that meant that all we had to do was type in the word print and put something in between the parentheses, and it did the functionality of printing. And in this case, we can do the same thing. We can just reuse our function all over the place. Now, you can see when I type the word add, it does recognize my function, and it even tries to suggest, hey, this looks like the function that you've declared. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to keep typing all of the things that we defined in our function below. So in this case, first number, and I'm going to hand it a number. Since functions can have decimal places, let's do 15.5. And then for our second number, we can do 3.5, I guess. And you will see that just like we saw in a previous lesson, everything is highlighting it, recognizes it, but we get this warning that tells us, hey, you called this function, and this function returns a number, and you're not doing anything with it. You should do something with it. And so what we're going to do here is we're going to actually do something with it. We're going to create a variable that will actually hold that, that returned double, and we're going to be able to save it for later. We're going to be able to use it for things. So in this case, we're going to, just like in our previous lessons, we're going to type let added numbers. So that is a variable called added numbers. And we're going to assign it the value of 15.5 plus 3.5. So it's going to be assigned the value that is coming out of our function. And then we're going to use another function. We're going to use the print function, and we can just do print added numbers. So right now we have updated our app to add 15.5 to 13.5 using a function we just wrote, and then use a function that we didn't write. It's going to print it out. So we run our app, and you can see right down there in the console, it prints the number 19, just like we would have expected. So like we mentioned in our previous lesson, we used the print function over and over and over again, and we didn't have to retype out everything that the print function does, because it does quite a few things internally and kind of under the hood that you don't need to know about. So in this case, we can reuse our add function by creating a new variable, typing our add keyword, which is the name of our function, and giving it 2 numbers, and then we're going to print the result yet again. And you can see when we run our app, it pulls up our view, which we are not currently using, and you can see that prints out 19 and 13.8163, which apparently is the result of these 2 numbers added together. So this is awesome. We've now actually taken a class that was provided by Apple. We have subclassed it when we created our template, and now we've added functionality to it by creating our own function called add. And we've started to see how we can use that function over and over and over again to do things that we couldn't normally do, or that we could normally do, but would maybe be a little bit harder or require us to rewrite the same code over and over and over again. So this is a huge time saver for us as programmers, and it makes our life really easy. All right, that's it for this lesson. The next lesson is finally the episode you've all been waiting for, where we actually start building what will end up looking just like our calculator app.